Next. And I think of myself as the crazy aunt of the Genocide Intervention Fund. And I'd like to echo my co-panelists' comments. It's really something to see all of you here on a Friday evening. I've worked on African issues for more years than many of you have been alive. And I can tell you, as Professor Reeves can tell you, as I'm sure my colleagues from Sudan would tell any of us, that working on issues like Sudan has often been a lonely business, and it is incredibly inspiring that that's no longer the case. So our hats are off to all of you. I want to take advantage of the fact that we are looking back almost exactly 11 years to the Rwandan genocide and pick up from where the ambassador was about what has and hasn't changed. I think there are two fundamental things that haven't changed that those of us who care about this have to grapple with. One is that Africa is still at the bottom of the priority list in U.S. foreign policy. That's true in terms of the allocation of our intelligence resources, for example, the kinds of things that would allow policymakers to know well in advance and prepare and act if indeed there was the will to do so. You've all heard about the great shortage we have in Arabic speakers. I imagine that the number of Kenya-Rwanda speakers in 1993 and 1994 was also very small. In fact, the Defense Department has reduced intelligence coverage of Africa in recent months. It's true on the diplomatic level. There are no rewards for our diplomats that serve in Africa. You get the rewards for serving in the high-profile countries or in Europe. So there's no career incentive to serving in Africa. We've had some very good ambassadors, but they're there because they care about Africa, not because it's a good career track. And it's true in terms of resources. Even with the new money for HIV and AIDS and the Millennium Challenge account, Africa gets less in total than many individual countries in the Middle East and South Asia. The other thing that hasn't changed is political will, and Professor Reeves spoke to that. I think there are a number of reasons. In the case of Rwanda, it was Somalia and fear of the public blowback after the very, very negative reaction to the shots of 18 Marines being dragged through the streets of Mogadishu. It was a Congress and a White House that were more often engaged in partisan politics, which is something we certainly haven't recovered from, than they were in doing what needed to be done. Today, I think the political will problem derives from a foreign policy that is driven almost entirely and with missionary zeal by the intervention in Iraq and everything that falls from it, by the shortages of resources that exist because of that, whether in the big picture in terms of the budget deficit or in terms of troops and the kind of military support that could be lent to an intervention. There is a desire, I think, on the part of the White House to minimize any other risk, given that they have taken some heat for Iraq. And this is not an administration that is proven very adept at working internationally and multilaterally, which is something that is also necessary to get this job done. I think there are three things that have changed, and I'm going to differ a little bit with my friend the professor here on one of them. One is that there is the African Union. When Rwanda happened, there was the Organization of African Unity, which by comparison was an old boys club. It was an organization that was built on a premise and a notion of sovereignty, which said that whatever you do in your country is fine, whatever I do in my country is fine, and we'll stay out of each other's business. Within the AU, that has changed, and while I think some of the weaknesses that have been pointed to are accurate, the fact of the matter is that the AU's initial intervention in Sudan constitutes a reshaping of the concept of sovereignty in a very fundamental way. Because they basically said to the Sudanese government, your internal business is our business. And that's unprecedented, and I think very important. The second thing that's different is the media. We have more of it. I wish that fact meant that they covered more issues, as we are now 24 hours a day on the Terry Schiavo case and nothing else. But what we do have in the internet and in the media is much more of a drumbeat and a demand for action than was the case in 1994. Whether it's Christoph in the New York Times, the professor and others getting op-eds placed out there, the number of websites that exist, there is coverage. The other thing that is different is you. I have not seen student activism of the type I've seen on Darfur since any time since the anti-apartheid movement. And I'm sure there are times you feel like it doesn't make a difference. I can tell you as a former policymaker, it makes a huge difference. Members of Congress think about what their constituents think about. Now, if you're lucky enough to live outside the District of Columbia, where we have no voting members of Congress, writing your congressman, going to see your congressman makes a difference. They pay attention to that. In the White House, when they know there are thousands of students across the country and others that care about this, that registers. Now, maybe not sufficiently yet, but it registers, and it's extremely important.